Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever or however you're listening. Hopefully, you're doing well. Hopefully, you enjoyed the last couple shows that I did. Last week, we had Jeff Deist on. Seemed to be a very popular show. A lot of people seem to like that. I thought it was a fantastic show, and he seemed to agree as I did get a follow up email from him. So, very, very thankful Jeff could come on. And of course, on Wednesday, we had our dear friend Red Hawk back on the show just to kind of talk about everything going on and kind of kick the wheels on some of the more recent developments. Always good to talk to him, as always. Um, a lot to talk about today. I couldn't squeeze everything I wanted to talk about today into the title, but we will be covering Venezuela, lots of China, Japan, and Taiwan stuff, as well as Trump's 28-point plan for Ukraine and some of the latest going on with Venezuela. I hate to say it, but glued to my phone when it comes to look at the news when it comes to Venezuela, because I think me, much like everybody else, is just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop here. Um, I feel pretty comfortable in saying that they're going to do some kind of military action. It may not be a regime change, but I think regime change kind of is the goal here. Um, so I don't know if I see anything while we're live here. I'll obviously update you guys, but we're going to cover everything that I got now. I actually there's a good article from Zero Hedge that I literally pulled up right before I went live. I wasn't going to cover it, but I did see that they had that up, and it kind of had everything that is the latest as of right now. So we're talking quarter till 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on this wonderful Sunday, March 30th. So like I said, lots to talk about, lots going on. I guess before we get into today's show, please go to all the links below where you can find me, everything I've got going on. Of course, the great Megalodon as well. This past week, just put out an article talking about visiting or revisiting bands that you hate, because I think it's a very, very useful exercise if you're into any kind of heavier music or just music in general. Um, Also got the Tiger Fitness sale, Black Friday sale going on right now. Go to tigerfitness.com/Kyle M. Let them know that I sent you. Tons of free goodies to get, and hopefully everybody took advantage of their Black Friday sales just all overall over on the internet here. Um, my wife did get me the Heavies headphones, which are just absolutely out of this world. She didn't get me the gaming headset, so I bought that, but she got me these wonderful headphones that they just sound awesome. Like they start up, they sound awesome, they feel good. I feel like I'm gonna break them when I pull out like the earphones themselves, but just I can't say how much I love them. And I know they've done a very, very good job of like marketing themselves, because these are just like awesome looking, awesome feeling, awesome sounding headphones. They're all over the internet, and my wife knew that I wanted them, so she got them for me. So, anyways, yeah, of course, tigerfitness.com/KyleM. Use code Kyle at checkout. Unless there's a Black Friday sale, then just make sure you go over there. Fox and Sons Coffee, use code Kyle at checkout as well to let Steven know that I sent you. I know we're a little bit early today, but I just wanted to get this out of the way for the day. Did a little bit of running around with my wife and brother and daughter, obviously, throughout this morning, which is really cool. I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I know Hawk and I wished everybody a happy Thanksgiving on the show, and the Patreon episode of 5 Till Midnight. We also did kind of just talked about Thanksgiving. That was a lot of fun. So if you'd be so inclined, make sure you go and subscribe to 5 Till Midnight as well, because I will be there live tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as well. Your favorite Monday night show. So I think that's about all I got, or all I got for the intro of the show. Please make sure you hit like, subscribe, share, and consider becoming a channel member to help support me and the Matovcik family here. I am looking to continue, obviously, grow the channel and do a lot more with it. So it would mean a lot if you considered becoming a channel member for the lowly price of $2.99 a month. That's a coffee. It's literally less than a coffee. I know everybody says you could afford this if you can just buy coffee or hold off on your coffee. This literally is cheaper than that. I would like to pride myself on just having a very, very cheap channel membership. And we're going to be doing pre-recorded shows again eventually, and you'll get early access to those, as well as all the Common Crowns recorded performances that I can get with my GoPro. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the rest of today's show about Rubio State Department raising the world. All right, before we get into the first show, like I said, hopefully everybody's doing well. Life is good over here in the Matovcik household. I have no complaints. I just did Ready Evening as well on Friday night with Jack Napier and our dear friend Rob as well. So that was a really really fun show where we talked about political stuff towards the end, but it was actually mostly a debate surrounding Saint Anger and how we all feel about Saint Anger and let it be known that I am a fan of Metallica's Saint Anger, which is a very controversial take, but one that I will defend to the grave. Um, on that show, we did defend it. It was about an hour in. I think we started talking about that because I hadn't seen either one of those guys in quite a while. And obviously, with the family and everything, I've just been insanely busy. And it kind of makes it a little bit more difficult for me to do weekday night streams, which I still will do them occasionally. But, that's just as time permits. And, as I become a father of a progressively getting older little girl, she demands more and more of my time, and I find that time with her and my wife is much more important than doing this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think that's that. So, the first story of the day that I wanted to talk about is the whole Afghani shooter, which seems to have already come and gone completely out of the news cycle. But I figured I would just kind of talk about it. So, this is an article from AP. Uh, where is it? Let me get everything situated here. Trump criticizes the program that brought Afghan refugees to the U.S. who fought the Taliban. The man accused of shooting two National Guard members in Washington is one of about 76,000 Afghans brought to the United States after the chaotic withdrawal of the U.S. from their country as the Taliban took over, authorities said. So, what's so funny about this is that Byron Donalds actually, there was a clip that resurfaced of him just ranting and raving about how great this program was and about how we have a responsibility to take care of Afghani people. And I'm almost sympathetic to that, but also I'm more sympathetic to Americans and Americans' needs and desires. And the fact that even back in 2021, the country was still in complete and total chaos and disarray. So, despite the fact that Biden completely botched the withdrawal of Afghanistan and the US had destroyed that country for the most part, I don't think that puts the obligation on us to accept all these people into our country. I think the obligation should be that we pull out of there. And, okay, maybe you could make an argument for humanitarian aid. I wouldn't entirely be against that either. But we definitely don't have an obligation to bring in people into the country that absolutely hate us for good reason. So, if these Afghans betrayed their countries and their people, we better bring them here. Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly the problem. Literally, you have a Republican congressman saying that we should do this, and we have a responsibility to them. The fuck we do. Anyways, Trump was right to criticize this, but he also his administration had gave him amnesty here. So where is it? The program called Operation Allies Welcome was created after the 2021 decision to leave Afghanistan following 20 years of American intervention and billions of dollars of aid. Democratic President Joe Biden, who oversaw the withdrawal started by his predecessor, Republican President Donald Trump, said the U.S. owed it to the interpreters and translators, the fighters and the drivers, and others who opposed the Taliban to give them safe place outside of Afghanistan, which, once again, I don't agree with that. But others, including Trump and many Republicans, said the refugees were not properly vetted in a resettlement process they said was chaotic and poorly planned as leaving the country to the Taliban, which, yeah, we did. But at a certain point, you just got to say, all right, no, we're done. This individual and so many others should have never been allowed to come here. Our citizens and service members deserve far better than to endure the ongoing fallout from the Biden administration's catastrophic failures, said John Radcliffe. Accused shooter worked with the CIA before coming to the U.S. as a refugee, which it's rich to me that you have a guy who literally worked for the CIA. And I've pointed this out plenty of times on the show. And I know Nick Fuentes has actually done a pretty good dive on this as well. The entire team that pretty much got Trump into the White House, with the exception of like Charlie Kirk, pretty much were all CIA. Larry Elder was a big guy here. He's CIA. Peter Thiel, who has contracts with the CIA. Tucker Carlson, family ties to the CIA. Who else? The Falun Gong and all of the Epic Times Network, CIA. And like Larry Elder himself isn't necessarily CIA, but though his show with Epic Times is a CIA outlet. I mean, there's like no ambiguity about this. They literally receive funds from the National Endowment for Democracy. So, the Joe Biden administration had this botched withdrawal and then had this policy where you welcomed all these people into the country. And then under Trump, they clear him to be a citizen. Now, people said it was a liberal judge that cleared him to be here. But if Trump made good on his policy, then he should have been deported, right? I mean, because he got cleared in April. If we're supposed to have the largest mass deportation campaign in history, then he should have been out of here. But we didn't have that because it sounds good on a campaign to say you're going to deport all these people. But when it comes down to actual brass tacks of doing things, that's where Trump always has fallen apart. Anyways, the accused shooter identified by law enforcement officials as Ramanullah Lakanwal worked with CIA as a member of the partner force in Kandahar, Radcliffe said in a statement Thursday. It didn't specify what Lakanwal did for America's spy agency. The Kandahar region in southern Afghanistan was in the Taliban heartland of the country and saw fierce fighting between the Taliban and NATO forces after the U.S.-led invasion in 2001 following the al-Qaeda attacks on September 11th. The CIA relied on Afghan staff for translation, administrative, and frontline fighting with their own paramilitary forces in the war. Little's known about Laconwal's 4 years in the U.S. or why he drove across the country from his home in Bellingham, Washington, where a former landlord said he lived with his wife and 5 children. Laconwal was granted asylum in April under the Trump administration, according to hashtag AfghanEvac, a group of veterans and others working to get Afghans who helped the U.S. out of the country in exchange for their help. Like all asylum seekers, he would have had to undergo fingerprinting and an iris scan, a full background check, and an interview and a risk assessment, the organization said. Um, and I mean, this really goes to the heart of why the Biden administration was actually so bad, is because the fact that you'd be willing to bring people in a situation like that, like, hey, I know we just destroyed your country and you helped us kind of do it. Why don't you just come here and hang out for a little bit? I don't see that working out very well, and clearly it didn't work out well. And of course, the Trump administration's response is just about nothing. He will throw out some fiery truth social posts, but ultimately will do nothing. Like with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, he ultimately did nothing. It's fucked up. It's sad, but they ultimately are choosing to do nothing. And I've said it many a times. I'm going to say it again. The Trump administration took the murder of George Floyd more serious than they took the assassination of Charlie Kirk, because ultimately they did nothing. Anyways, Operation Allies Welcome brought tens of thousands of Afghans to the U.S. Groups that help resell Afghans said the actions of the one man shouldn't reflect negatively on the tens of thousands who have gone through various legal pathways to resettling in the U.S. and the others who find themselves in limbo after Trump suspended almost all resettlement programs for nations across the world when he took office in January. I don't want people to leverage this tragedy into a political ploy, said Sean Van Diver, President of Afghan evac. After leaving Afghanistan, tens of thousands of those seeking resettlement ended up in sprawling air-conditioned tent villages at military bases like Joint Base McGuire, Dix, Lakehurst in New Jersey, Fort McCoy in Wisconsin, or at Fort Bliss in Texas. My brother put an ad blocker on here, and I'll tell you what, it is just wonderful. I had no idea how good this ad blocker actually works, because now I'm not getting thrown all over the place, and you guys don't have to see all the guitars on the side of the screen there. After months of health screenings and background checks, many were resettled in the established Afghan communities in Northern Virginia and the surrounding Washington area, as well as Northern California and Texas. States where between 1,000 and 3,000 have settled include Arizona, New York, Florida, Georgia, Colorado, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania, according to State Department data. Which is just absolutely nuts. Like, everybody's probably heard about how many Somalis are in Minneapolis, and it's like, Somalia is at like the center of the hemisphere, right? Or right at the equator. It's hot all year round there. It's mostly a jungle. Why do Somalians want to live in Minnesota? Like, there's literally a giant ethnic enclave of Somalis that are committing mass fraud and costing taxpayers billions of dollars, to my understanding, that live in Minneapolis. Why are they all here? I mean, the proper thing to do is the US stops bombing their country, which we're going to cover this here in a little bit, and they all go back home. We don't care about your civil war. We don't care about what's going on over there, how bad Al-Shabaab is. You got to go home. You can't stay here anymore, because it's a burden on taxpayers, and Americans are already suffering through enough. We need to find some way to make America for Americans again. Anyways, Trump stops aid for settlement after taking office. Trump's executive order shortly after taking office in January suspending federal funding for resettlement agencies made it tougher to help refugees with basic necessities like food, rent, handcuffing the most religious groups that help them, which I'm perfectly okay with. That's actually the right move by the Trump administration. The president, who's described Afghanistan as hell as a hellhole on earth, already planned to review every Afghan who entered the country under Operation Allies Welcome and reiterated that goal after Wednesday's shooting. If they can't love our country, we don't want them, Trump said in a message released on social media, adding that the shooting was a crime against our entire nation, which I'm going to be honest, Trump was right here. Trump administration wants to shut the door to most refugees. Trump also uses message to attack refugees from Somalia who have settled in Minnesota, saying they're ripping apart that once great state. It's part of his administration's goal to both deport people in the country illegally and close the country to most refugees. Trump said he wants to remove anyone who does not belong here and who does not benefit our country, which once again, this is probably one of the better issues for Trump is immigration, where I think a lot of the people who voted for him and are always saying, I voted for this, they kind of have a point because he is very anti-immigration in this respect. Now, not nearly anti-immigration enough because you still hear him praising the H-1B program and saying that we need all these students from China, which I think people are a little hyperbolic and over the top when they talk about they're all spies. I think it's just more that the college universities should be for Americans. They shouldn't be for Chinese students. And if they go under because they can't survive without, 500,000 Chinese students, who cares? Our country is already suffering under this giant student loan debt bubble, which is pretty much held up by the formerly low interest rates and also the fact that the government guarantees all this debt. If these colleges can't survive without foreigners coming in, then they shouldn't survive at all. And I think that's like, I think pretty much everybody's on the same page about that. So why do we need all them here? But once again, Trump is mostly solid on immigration, but I think he could always be better. People make fun of Thomas Massey about not being good enough on immigration, but honestly, I think he's better than Trump. One of the Afghans who made it to the U.S. was Mohammed Sabor, a father of 7 children, worked as an electrician and AC technician in the international and U.S. forces for 17 years. He resettled earlier this year in California and told the Associated Press he looked forward to sending his kids to school and giving back to the country that took his family in. I believe now we can live in a 100% peaceful environment, Sabor said. Which just that little bit at the end there, it's so manipulative, and it really is just a way to make people feel bad about being anti-immigration. And I think that's really like the only America First position is to be completely against immigration at this point. If we solve the plummeting birth rates and the affordability crisis and inflation and all the military issues, if we solve like those things, we could maybe have a conversation about immigration, or at least I think you could have like a reasonable conversation about immigration. But right now, I just don't think it's acceptable to have any level of immigration because you're taking very, very scarce resources away from the Americans who need it who are already living in a very, very stressed system. So if you go back to the beginning of this podcast 4 years ago, I was taking a very different tune, but it just wasn't as apparent to me as it is now that immigration is such a big deal and that you have a bunch of people who shouldn't be here that are using public resources, doing a lot of jobs that do pay a little bit less, but it's also keeping downward pressure on a lot of wages because they figure, okay, well, I could just hire an immigrant that's going to do these jobs for cheaper. The Americans should occupy those jobs, and the companies that are paying those people should have to pay them a little bit more. Am I saying that there should be like some federally mandated minimum wage? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying just that the right thing to do is for these companies to pay these people more because they have the money. It's not like a lot of these companies are really hurting that much, like especially the corporations, stuff like that. They get bailed out by the government anyways. So just pay the people more. Like it's really that simple. So I know I was just talking about Somalis and Somalia a little bit. We're going to talk about this article from Dave DeCamp over at antiwar.com. U.S. bombed Somalia for the 100th time this year, which I think actually there was an 101st and 102nd airstrike. But this is just kind of the pinnacle here. It's been 1 year under the Trump administration. We've already bombed Somalia over 100 times. AFRICOM said the strikes targeted the ISIS affiliate in Somalia's northeastern Puntland region. U.S. African Command announced on Sunday that its forces have launched two more airstrikes in Somalia, bringing the total number of U.S. bombings in the country this year to at least 100, an unprecedented number. AFRICOM said the strikes were launched on November 21st and November 22nd, about 37 miles southeast of the Gulf of Aden and the port city of Basaso, where U.S. backed forces have been fighting against an ISIS affiliate, Cal Muscad, in the Cal Muscad Mountains. The command offered no other details about the strikes as it stopped sharing casualty estimates and assessments on civilian harm earlier this year. Specific details about units and assets will not be released to ensure continued operation security, which basically means that we will not release any information on the people we're killing because it looks bad for the administration to be slaughtering civilians halfway across the earth, especially when you claim to be the peace president. No new wars and all this stuff, but you continue the war that has gone on the longest out of any war, which is in Somalia. Trump, the last record was set under the Trump administration. I think it was 70-ish times that he did airstrikes on Somalia and, throughout his entire presidency. But then the U.S. has just been absolutely bombing the living shit out of Somalia this past year. And as David Camp always covers on his show, it just gets next to no attention. The Puntland counterterrorism operations claimed on Saturday that a U.S. airstrike killed 5 fleeing ISIS terrorists and also said its forces detained a Moroccan national who it said was the head of GPS navigation systems for the ISIS affiliate. The U.S. supports local Puntland forces in the region because the U.S.-backed federal government based in Mogadishu doesn't control the region. Garo Online, a media outlet based in Puntland, reported that Puntland officials said their forces took control of one of the last known ISIS positions in the Balade Valley, hopefully I said that right, the area of the Kalmascod Mountains where recent fighting has been focused. The Puntland government has come under criticism recently over reports that the UAE has been shipping weapons to Sudan to arm the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, which has been accused of committing genocide and recently committed massacres against civilians after it took the city of Al Fasher in Sudan's western Darfur region. According to a report from Middle East Eye, the U.S. has also been using the air base in Basaso to support its military operations in Somalia. The Trump administration has continued to provide support for the federal government's fight against al-Shabaab in southern Somalia, and provide heavy air support for an offensive in Somalia's southern Jubaland region earlier this month. According to local media reports, a suspected U.S. airstrike in the town of Jemaim in Jubaland killed 12 civilians, including 8 children. AFRICOM told antiwar.com on Friday that its forces launched a total of 98 airstrikes in Somalia so far in 2025, making the 2 latest airstrikes the 99th and the 100th of the year. So one thing about these airstrikes too is also they could be more than just, this isn't, when they say drone strike, it doesn't mean they just dropped one bomb and left. This could be like a sustained campaign of a whole bunch of bombs being dropped out of a B-52 or something like that. It's not like they just drop by, kill a few people and go home. Sometimes it's pretty bad. So something else to keep in mind there. The Trump administration had shattered the previous annual record for U.S. airstrikes in Somalia, which President Trump set at 63 back in 2019. Okay, so I was somewhat close, 70-ish. For context, President Biden launched a total of 51 airstrikes in Somalia throughout his 4 years in office, and President Obama launched 48 over 8 years. Despite the unprecedented number of U.S. airstrikes this year, there's virtually no media coverage in the air war in U.S. media. The U.S. has been fighting against al-Shabaab since the group first emerged in 2007, a year after the U.S. backed an Ethiopian invasion that ousted the Islamic Courts Union, a Muslim coalition that briefly held power in Mogadishu. Al-Shabaab was the radical offshoot of the Islamic Courts Union, and its first recorded attack was a suicide bombing that targeted Ethiopian troops occupying Mogadishu. The ISIS affiliate in Somalia that's now based in Puntland started as an offshoot of al-Shabaab and first emerged in 2015. So, as you could see, as with most U.S. foreign policy, whenever we start to back people in different countries or do stuff like this, it just always ends up having the opposite of the intended effect, which is just abundantly clear here after what they basically just laid out there in the very end of the article. You back an Ethiopian invasion, and then the Somalis don't like it, and then more people end up dying than more than likely otherwise would have. So there's no reason for us to have this air campaign going on in Somalia. Like, what interests does the U.S. have in Somalia? Like, there's nothing that we can't get from Somalia that we can't get from somewhere else. Does Al Shabaab really fight? Or are they like some kind of grave danger threat to the United States? I don't think there's anybody who could look at me with a straight face and say yes. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So, in more relevant, well, I shouldn't say more relevant, but in more relevant news that's kind of taken over the internet by storm right now is the Venezuela stuff that's going on now. So Trump rejects Maduro request for amnesty and newly disclosed phone calls. So I think to lay the backdrop to this, um, Marco Rubio, who now is serving as Secretary of State and the not national security advisor, but whatever two positions he holds, he has wanted this regime change war and to completely essentially fuck up Venezuela for years now. Ever since he first got into the Senate, this has been his wet dream and has been something that he's been working on a lot. So now he's finally going to get it under the current Trump administration. And according to most reports that I've seen, they've complied with all the deportation flights. Even Trump himself has said that Maduro is willing to give him pretty much everything, cut ties with China, cut ties with Russia, Iran, whoever, and basically do anything that the US wants. And the US has just completely ignored it. And they're pushing forward with this. Essentially, it's going to be a regime change war or at least a military intervention. Um, they're claiming it's over drugs, but even Trump's own drug enforcement agency has said that the vast majority of drugs do not come from Venezuela. So I can't help but think that this is just because Marco Rubio's there and this is his wet dream is to have military action against Venezuela and do this whole Monroe Doctrine style foreign policy against Cuba, against Venezuela, against Honduras, against all the countries down there that he wants this to be made in the Marco Rubio image where you can't have socialism or communism to the south of your border, which like, okay, I don't like socialism or communism either, but like what are we willing to do about this? Are we really going to send American troops down there to go overthrow Venezuela because we don't like Maduro? Because that's essentially what they're trying to do. So anyways, President Donald Trump has reportedly rejected Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's request for broad amnesty during a newly disclosed phone conversation last week, telling Maduro and his top advisors to drop their demands and swiftly exit Venezuela as U.S. military pressure intensifies, which has lately included an order to halt all flights in the country's sovereign airspace. According to people familiar with the exchange who spoke to the Wall Street Journal, which once again take this with a grain of salt because this could be bullshit, Trump and Maduro discussed a sweeping amnesty plan during which Maduro is said to have sought blanket legal protection for himself, his senior officials, and their families. Trump told Maduro that if he didn't leave willingly, the U.S. would consider other options, including the use of force, according to people familiar with the discussion. So I've said it before, but I have always been skeptical of sources whenever they say they're close to the Trump administration, because how many times have we heard, oh, the Trump administration is really going to do this from people who are really good friends with people in the administration? All the staffers are saying they're really going to do something, and then nothing happens. It's happened a lot. So I'm sorry if I don't really believe the White House sources or the people who say, oh, no, I have friends who are staffers, and you just got to trust the plan a little bit more. It never works out that way. So I'm sorry. I don't think that you're lying to me, but I think the people you're talking to are trying to sell you on everything going on now. So they're going to give you the best case scenario, either that or they hear one thing and then at the senior level, they do something completely different. Many of those same officials are at this moment under U.S. sanctions or face criminal charges related to corruption and narcotics trafficking. President Trump is said to have dismissed the proposal while warning Maduro that if the United States would ramp up military action if he refused to step down. This is consistent with prior Washington regime change operations in places like the Middle East, which has seen many longtime rulers overthrown, including Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, and Bashar al-Assad. A number of top-ranking Maduro officials have been called out by the Trump administration and urged to leave the country immediately, including Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello, Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, and National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez. Trump, while speaking at Mar-a-Lago during Thanksgiving, apparently days after the secretive phone call, hinted that the U.S. ground operations against Venezuela could begin soon. The land is easier. That's going to start very soon. We warn them, stop sending poison into our country, which, one more time, they are not responsible for that. According to some of the details of the newly disclosed call via the New York Times, the conversation took place late in the week, to the people said. It included discussion about a possible meeting between the two men in the United States, according to the people with knowledge of the matter, who were granted anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter publicly. There are no plans at the moment for such a meeting, one of the people said. The phone call, which included Secretary of State Marco Rubio, came days before a State Department designation of Mr. Maduro as the leader of what the administration considers a foreign terrorist organization, Cartel de las Solas, came into effect, which that stands for Cartel of the Suns, and my understanding is that Cartel of the Suns doesn't actually exist. The Cartel of the Suns was given that name because some of the troops back in, I think it was the 90s, used to have insignias of suns on their military uniforms, and they branded themselves as the Cartel of the Suns. That was 20, 30 years ago, and they're no longer active in Venezuela. There are some active parts that call themselves that, and I think it's like Washington or Colorado. That's it. But the correct option would be to send the military in and disband the cartels and deport them. Like, well, we don't have to fight a war with Venezuela. We have Venezuela back home. Not literally, but literally just deport these people and leave Venezuela the fuck alone. If you, this is clearly partially about their oil too, because they have the largest oil reserves in the entire world. I was listening to Jose Nino this morning talk about this because he's very, very familiar with Venezuela and also kind of like the domestic situation. And the oil requires a little bit more refining. Okay, well, why don't we just, if we're going to have some kind of like global empire like we do right now, then why don't we just give them like a preferred trading partner status and then just get their oil? Like, you don't have to fight a war with them. Just, I'm sure they, if they were willing to give up relations with China and Russia and Iran, then we can easily get in there as well. Like, I don't understand what the big deal is. And I think the big deal actually is Marco Rubio. So after this, Trump announced that the airspace over Venezuela should now be considered closed. Quote, to all airlines, pilots, drug dealers, and human traffickers, please consider the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela to be closed in its entirety. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump wrote on X. Earlier this month, Federal Aviation Administration warned pilots to exercise caution near Venezuela's airspace due to the worsening security situation and heightened military activity. That's just a tweet. The Pentagon has been deploying warships and other military assets in the Caribbean this year. The deployment centers around bolstering hemispheric defense, and the Trump administration has formally characterized Nicolas Maduro as the head of a terrorist organization and considers his government illegitimate. Quick response after the U.S. orders what's effectively a total airspace closure over the Latin American country. So here, if you're just listening, basically it shows the drastic reduction of flights. So right now, at the time of this is 8:17 p.m. last night. There's a total of six planes, actually seven in this picture. This policy harkens back to the first Trump administration, during which time there appeared to be clandestine efforts to foment unrest or else a military coup. These activities didn't amount to much. However, Maduro had vehemently denounced external meddling and vowed to go after and punish the collaborators. Last year on the campaign trail, the would-be second-term president didn't mention anything in his policy platform about sweeping regime change action in Venezuela, which likely would have been met with a lot of opposition within the MAGA movement. Which not really. I mean, you kind of see this now. There's really not that many people in the whole MAGA coalition, such as it is, that are opposed to this regime change war in Venezuela, which is very, very bad to see. Tucker Carlson did an interview with Colonel Douglas McGregor, who is, I'm kind of shaky on him. I somewhat like him, but also I guess he does do his own tweets, and sometimes it's total slop coming out of his account. But he is good on most issues, and he's good on this issue. And it is really good to see that Tucker Carlson, probably the greatest voice on the right today, is absolutely solid on this issue as well. Yeah, this is going to be a disaster if they try to go through with this. And I really hope that if Trump does decide to pull the trigger on this one, that he quickly loses a lot of support, because I've been saying for a long time now that like Trump the MAGA base needs to move on from Trump. I understand he's the president and everything, but it's just not doing well for the he's not serving the American people well, and he's not living up to his promises. He's gone back on so much, he's conceded so much. I don't know why people are still so loyal to Trump in this respect, because I feel like if there's anybody else, they probably would have given up already. But also, when it comes time to vote in the presidential election, people are just always go back to like single digit IQ and just pull the lever for one person or another because this person's worse than the other. And I don't think people would stay home if it was, let's say in 2028, it's Ted Cruz, which I don't think is likely at all. The vast majority of people who voted for Trump will go vote for Ted Cruz just because he's not AOC, heaven forbid, Gavin Newsom or somebody like that. That's just the way people are. They don't think about these issues very deeply. They kind of go about their day. And then, some like more and more people are getting into politics because it's conquering so much of our lives and like it's so omnipresent all the time. And we're looking for somebody to kind of crank the pressure down on the white hot culture war and also this overbearing government that's ruining a lot of aspects of normal life. So people are going to do whatever they can to get some sense of control. Red Hawk has said it before, and I think he's actually right that um, the biggest reason that people voted for Trump this time around was because they feel like they didn't have control of their country anymore. They want control again, so they went with the guy who kind of ran on some semblance of control. And of course, I, I if you were to vote in this last election, I think Trump was the only option. What are you gonna do? Vote for Chase Oliver? Would you seriously vote for Kamala Harris? Like, there were no good options, but out of all those options, Trump was easily the best candidate. Did I support him? No. Would I? No. So let's run an ad real quick. Make sure you go to Tiger Fitness, and we'll be right back. All right, we're going to take a second today to chill and tell you about the show's sponsors, Tiger Fitness. Make sure you go to the link below to get all the supplements that I use day in, day out, and beyond. As I always say, you do not need supplements to become all jacked and tan or to progress in your health journey, but they could definitely be a useful tool in that respect. So, as you can see on tigerfitness.com, we got MTS Nutrition, Blackstone Labs, Ambrosia, HPN, Nutrix Research, America Labs, Alani New, Pump Chasers, there's Redcon One, Accent Sledge, plenty of different companies that pretty much have absolutely any supplement you could possibly think of: pre-workouts, fat burners, BCAAs, electrolyte mixes, you name it, it's on there. So go to Tiger Fitness through the link below. Use code Kyle at checkout to let them know that I sent you. Get your protein powder, you name it, anything that's going to help you stick to your diet and hopefully achieve your health goals. All right, thanks. Back to the show. Cool, cool, cool. All right, so I have this video pulled up from what we're going to talk about in our next article. Uh, we're going to be talking about the 28-point peace plan that's going on for Ukraine and how I believe that ultimately it's not really going to lead to anything. So let me get here. DD Geopolitics, share this tab instead. All right. So let's zoom in a little bit here. Talks in Florida have wrapped up. Rubio briefed reporters. His comments made it clear that no final agreements were reached with the Ukrainian delegation on the key disputed issues. He called the meeting productive enough, but there's still work to do. He seems very underwhelmed, exhausted, exasperated, all normal when dealing with Ukrainians.
All right, and I apologize because I'm pressed for time. I think we both are, but I just wanted to update you. We had another very productive session building off Geneva, building off the events of this week. As I told you earlier this morning, our goal here is to end the war.
So when you're dealing with Marco Rubio, I don't think you're going to get any honesty or any productive meetings just because he's not the kind of guy that wants to stop a war. That's just who Marco Rubio is. He is one of Trump's worst, if not Trump's worst pick out of everybody. And we're going to talk about why he's such a problem here. Where is it? Does this have? Oh, I forgot one article. Let me pull this up. I am sorry about this. There we go. There, that is okay. Yeah, Marco Rubio has essentially sabotaged pretty much all peace talks in every single theater. And why he still has a job, I have no idea. And the amount of people that told me I was like a retard for opposing Marco Rubio, it's kind of astounding to me because he's literally the antithesis to what Trump campaigned on. Trump gives him a job, and now at every turn, he's always undermining him and what his desires are. So let's talk about this article here. Media US wants Ukraine or the US wants a Ukraine peace deal before security guarantees, which just like the idea that we're going to have security guarantees for Ukraine is just insane in on all facets. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has told EU officials that Washington wants Ukraine to sign a peace deal before it agrees to any security guarantees. Politico reported on Wednesday. From Tehran, Borna, Kiev has been seeking formal security assistances from its Western sponsors and insists they should come before a peace agreement. Moscow said it does not oppose security guarantees in principle, but insists they must not be one-sided or aimed at containing Russia and should come after a peace deal, not before. According to Politico, Rubio told EU officials that the U.S. views security guarantees for Ukraine as a priority, but as a separate issue from other parts of the peace deal. He reportedly signaled that U.S. President Donald Trump will discuss the guarantees with Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky after Kiev approves the U.S. peace plan proposed last week. According to leaked versions, the 28-point plan requires Kiev to abandon several long-standing quote-unquote red lines, including renouncing NATO membership, recognizing Russian sovereignty over Crimea and the Donbass republics, and capping its army at 600,000 troops, which Ukraine will likely not do. Caught off guard by the U.S. draft, which Kiev and its Western European backers viewed as favoring Moscow, they scrambled to prepare a counterproposal with key issues such as territorial concessions, Ukraine's NATO bid, and the size of the Ukrainian army reportedly removed or amended. The counterproposal reportedly includes security guarantees for Ukraine and modeled on NATO's Article 5 Collective Defense Clause, committing guarantor states to defend Ukraine against potential aggression, which this is just such a non starter. I don't know how they ever thought this was going to fly, where you're literally going to tell Russia, like, hey, I know you're fighting a war with Ukraine and you consider this to be like your territorial sovereignty to not have NATO right on your doorstep. How are they going to accept a deal where the US is going to basically give Ukraine security guarantees? Like, they may have said they may accept it in theory, but like the US, if they give them security guarantees, this is just going to guarantee the war starts up again eventually. Because what's the US going to do? It's going to send them more weapons, it's going to send them more aid, it's going to send them more intelligence. And unless Zelensky steps down and they get some kind of US puppet in there that's actually willing to listen to the US, if they want peace, which I don't think the US really does, then it's just this war is going to continue. And I called this early on. You can go back in the podcast catalog and listen to the episode I did on what Trump's Ukraine policy might look like. And I think I was even more accurate than I thought I was going to be. I did kind of have a hint of doubt in my mind when Trump was campaigning on ending the war that he may actually come through on it. But I mean, so far, it doesn't look good. And I really don't think he has any plan on how to bring this war to an end, when really all he would have to do is basically just be like, sorry, we're washing our hands of this. It was Joe Biden's catastrophe, and now you guys have to figure it out on your own. He could have did that early on, but now he's embedded in it. The minerals deal, sending more aid and intelligence, now flirting also with Tomahawk missiles. Um, he owns this. So unless he plans to really give some major concessions or just throw Ukraine to the wind and take a, basically a public loss, this is just going to keep going. Anyways, Zelensky has since said he wants to meet with Trump to discuss the plan further, insisting that his European backers be present for the talks. Trump has said he will meet with Zelensky when the peace deal is in its final stages. Moscow largely welcomed Trump's peace proposal, saying it could serve as the basis for a final settlement, but accused Kiev's European backers of trying to undermine the peace efforts and distort the plan for their own agenda. Russia has said it is ready to discuss the U.S. proposals. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to visit Moscow next week, which I used to think Steve Witkoff was kind of like the good guy in all this, but every single time it comes to negotiations, this always happens when it comes to the U.S. negotiating with, someone that's on the other side of conflict. They throw out completely unreasonable expectations of the opposite side. When the opposite side says, no, we're not listening to you, then they'd throw their hands up and wonder why nobody wants to negotiate with the US. It's because of stuff like this. They constantly try to undermine the other side, or they use the negotiations as basically as a way to get the opposing side to let their guard down so the US can go in and bomb them, or Israel can go in and bomb them. That happened in Qatar, that happened with Hamas, and that's probably happening right now with Venezuela, because they say there's backdoor talks, but I guarantee you all that is basically just a ploy to get them to let their guard down, and then the US is going to go in and do some kind of strikes or something like that. So it's not looking good, man. I'm not very positive about kind of what's going on here. So um let's continue on in this article for Trump's full 28-point Ukraine Russia peace plan. Where's that tab? There it is. Zoom in a little bit. Um President Trump's 28th plan for peace in Ukraine would force Kiev to give up additional territory in the east, cap the size of its military, and agree it will never join NATO, according to a draft obtained by Axios and verified by a Ukrainian official, a U.S. official, and a source familiar with the proposal. Why it matters. The U.S. side is pushing Ukraine to make a deal on an aggressive timeline, and despite the plan, including proposals Ukraine has repeatedly rejected up to now, President Volodymyr Zelensky is not ruling it out. A senior White House official acknowledged that the plan is not easy for Ukraine, but said the U.S. believes the war must end, and that if it doesn't, Ukraine is likely to lose even more territory. Catch up quick. The plan was drafted by Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, with input from Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, which just having Jared Kushner and Marco Rubio on any kind of peace negotiations is just like, it's not going to help. It's just not good. You can't do that because they're going to sabotage it every time. One thing that is actually worth noting here that I do want to bring up is Keith Kellogg is surprisingly absent from a lot of these talks, and he is kind of like the Ukraine or the Russia hawk, and he was part of the America First Policy Institute, who was saying that they just need to arm Ukraine more. And he's probably the one, along with Marco Rubio, that have been in Trump's ear saying, they could probably retake some territory. We could just send them more weapons and everything will be all right. I think those two are probably the two most responsible for dragging out this Ukraine conflict, but ultimately it does fall on Trump's lap because who's the guy that hired them? Trump is the guy that hired Marco Rubio and Keith Kellogg, and those two guys have Marco Rubio supported a lot of the aid and weapons sent to Ukraine. So, like, come on. So, hold on, let me blow this up again. Witkoff also consulted with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev on the plan. Dmitriev told Axios he's optimistic about it because, unlike past efforts, we feel the Russian position is really being heard. President Vladimir Putin has not publicly endorsed the plan. After meeting with Dmitriev, Witkoff and Kushner also discussed the plan with Zelensky's national security advisor, Rustem Umerov. U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll presented the plan to Zelensky on Thursday in writing. Afterwards, Zelensky said he was prepared to hold talks with it about Trump with his team. So one thing that I do also want to reiterate is everybody was so stoked about the whole dressing down of Zelensky and saying that Trump was really kicking him to the curb. But what ultimately happened? He sent him another aid package. Trump bitched out. Like, I don't think enough people really talk about that Trump completely backed down. He didn't kick Zelensky to the curb. Zelensky essentially made him his bitch. Because he still got what he wanted. And then Trump was still talking about giving security guarantees after that. So Trump's just, he's not good at this. Between the lines, Zelensky described the plan as the U.S. vision, but not a final offer. He said Ukraine had been clear about its red lines and would give its inputs and make the plan truly meaningful. A U.S. official also told Axios the administration sees the plan as a live document that could be changed based on discussions with the parties. The official claimed Ukraine was positive about many of the points during negotiations and managed to incorporate some of its positions. Trump has also given his personal endorsement to the plan, or his personal endorsement to the plan, the full details of which had not previously been published. We're making a serious effort to find a solution that will end the war in Ukraine the same way that we ended the war in Gaza, which they never did. We believe this plan is not easy, but it is good for Ukraine, the senior White House official said, which, once again, they never ended the war in Gaza because there was just another article recently where they killed a few Palestinians recently. So I forget who it was, but they said that a ceasefire with Israel basically means that the Palestinians, Hezbollah, whoever they're fighting against, ceases and Israel fires, which about sums it up. Zoom in. In additional to territorial concessions asked of Ukraine, the document says there would be a decisive, coordinated military response in the event of further Russian incursions into Ukrainian territory. It does not say what role the U.S. would play in such a response. The plan also includes economic components that would see some of frozen Russian assets to go towards rebuilding Ukraine. Sanctions on Russia lifted. The U.S. and Russia agreeing to partner long-term areas like the AI and mining, and Russia returning to the G8. Now, another kind of thorn in the side that I just don't think Russia's really going to go for is using the seized Russian funds to rebuild Ukraine. So they're literally taking money that they stole off of Russia and they're going to use to rebuild Ukraine, which obviously Ukraine had cost Russia some money in completely destroying. So I don't know. Don't know. Not good though. It's not good. All parties would get amnesty for their actions during the war, presumably meaning Russian officials and soldiers cannot be prosecuted for war crimes. The plan also calls for Ukraine to hold elections within 100 days of the deal. Zelensky told Axios in September that he wanted to hold elections once there was a ceasefire. Worth noting, the 28 points below reflect the current U.S. plan as of Thursday, barring minor changes to the language as it has been amended. It includes annotations from Axios and italics for the purposes of clarity. So here we are at the full 28-point plan. I'm going to read through all these points and we will discuss. Let's get in here. Ukraine's sovereignty will be confirmed, which I think it essentially already is. A comprehensive non aggression agreement will be concluded between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. All ambiguities over the last 30 years will be considered settled. It is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries and NATO will not expand further, which I don't believe that NATO will not expand further, as pretty much every single presidential administration expands NATO. And Russia has no plans on invading neighboring countries. They haven't. They went after Ukraine because they felt it was in their security interest. A dialogue will be held between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States, to resolve all security issues and create conditions for de escalation in order to ensure global security and increase opportunities for cooperation and future economic development. Ukraine will receive reliable security guarantees, which once again, I think Russia's just not going to go for this. Update. A separate document details the terms of the security guarantees. The U.S. and its NATO allies would treat an attack on Ukraine as an attack on the entire transatlantic community. So literally, it's basically NATO, Article 5 guarantees, which Russia just won't go for that. The reason why they didn't want why the special military operation kicked off in 2022 was because they didn't want NATO on their doorstep. Russia considered this a security issue for them. And if you have the US basically giving them security guarantees saying, hey, we're going to consider that if you attack Ukraine, then we'll consider that attack on NATO, then it's all but joining NATO, except for without, a formal decree of them joining NATO. And that's essentially what they're trying to do here. So I don't think Putin's going to go for it. The size of the Ukrainian armed forces will be limited to 600,000 personnel. Note, Ukraine's army is currently has about 800,000 to 850,000 personnel, and it has around 250,000 before the war, according to a Ukrainian official. Ukraine agrees to enshrine in its constitution that it will not join NATO, and NATO agrees to include in its statutes a provision that Ukraine will not be admitted in the future, which this is like a distinction without a difference. NATO agrees to not station troops in Ukraine. Note, NATO countries, including France and the UK, have been working on separate proposals that would include small numbers of European troops on Ukrainian soil after the war. This plan appears to disregard that possibility. European fighter jets will be stationed in Poland, which they pretty much already are. The U.S. guarantee, the U.S. will receive compensation for the guarantee. If Ukraine invades Russia, it will lose the guarantee. If Russia invades Ukraine, in addition to a decisive coordinated military response, all global sanctions will be reinstated. Recognition of the new territory and all other benefits of the deal will be revoked. If Ukraine launches a missile at Moscow or St. Petersburg without cause, the security guarantee will be deemed invalid. So, what does that mean by without cause? Because leaving that ambiguity in there, they're basically leaving completely open to say, oh, well, they had cause if Russia does something that Ukraine doesn't like, and then Ukraine attacks, then basically, once again, there's too much ambiguity here. And ambiguity that basically is unfavorable to Russia, but certainty that would favor the US and Ukraine. Ukraine is eligible for EU membership and will serve short term preferential access to the European market while this issue is being considered. A powerful global package of measures to rebuild Ukraine, including but not limited to the creation of Ukraine Development Fund to invest in fast growing industries, including technology, data centers, and artificial intelligence. So the AI bubble is going to get even bigger if this goes through, which I don't think it will. The United States will cooperate with Ukraine to jointly rebuild, develop, modernize, and operate Ukraine's gas infrastructure, including pipelines and storage facilities. Joint efforts to rehabilitate war affected areas for restoration and reconstruction, modernization of cities and residential areas, infrastructure development, extraction of minerals and natural resources, and the World Bank will develop a special financing package to accelerate these efforts. I haven't been saying the numbers, but 13, Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy. The lifting of sanctions will be discussed and agreed upon in stages on a case by case basis. The United States will enter into a long term economic cooperation agreement for mutual development in the area of energy, natural resources, infrastructure, artificial intelligence, data centers, rare earth metal extraction projects in the Arctic, and other mutually beneficial corporate opportunities. Russia will be invited to rejoin the G8. So, kind of on that whole point, I think this goes to the idea, and I've heard a lot of like pro Trump people talk about this, where Russia and the US should be allies against China, which I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think Russia is going to, if they decide to take this plan or some form of this plan and then rejoin as partners with the US, then I think Russia's just going to be like, hey, we'll be friends with you and we're still pretty cool with China because BRICS, right? We already have this agreement and we have a good relationship. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. I don't think they're going to abandon their relationship with China to side with the US when the US has funded their enemies. I think it's really that simple. Frozen funds will be used as follows: $100 billion in frozen Russian assets will be invested in US led efforts to rebuild and invest in Ukraine, which once again, I just don't think they're going to go for. The US will receive 50% of the profits from this venture. Europe will add $100 billion to increase the amount of investment available for Ukraine's reconstruction. Frozen European funds will be unfrozen. The remainder of the frozen Russian funds will be invested in the separate US Russian investment vehicle that will implement joint projects in specific areas. This fund will be aimed at strengthening relations and increasing common interests to create a strong incentive to not return to conflict. 15, a joint American Russian working group on security issues will be established to promote and secure compliance with all the provisions of this agreement. 16, Russia will enshrine in law its policy of non aggression towards Europe and Ukraine, which I still think this is relatively ambiguous. The United States and Russia will agree to extend the validity of treaties on the non-proliferation and control of nuclear weapons and soon including the START 1 treaty. Note, New START, the last major Russian-U.S. arms control treaty, is due to expire in February. 18. Ukraine agrees to be a non-nuclear state in accordance with the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. 19. The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant will be launched under the supervision of the IAEA, and the electricity produced will be distributed equally between Russia and Ukraine, 50-50, which actually I think that's probably a reasonable thing to do. Both countries to undertake and implement educational programs in schools of society aimed at promoting understanding, tolerance of different cultures, and eliminating racism and prejudice, which just like is it's like DEI. Like we're going to put wokeism into schools so that way you don't learn about the big bad Russians or the little small awful Ukrainian Jews. Ukraine will adopt EU rules on religious tolerance and protection of linguistic minorities. Both countries will agree to abolish all discriminatory measures and guarantee the rights of Ukrainian Russian media and education. Note similar ideas were incorporated in Trump's 2020 Israel Palestine peace plan, which is pretty funny to read that. All Nazi ideology and activities must be rejected and prohibited, which what does that even mean? 21 territories. Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk will be recognized as de facto Russian, including by the United States, which they might as well be now because Russia doesn't have to listen. Kherson and Zaporizhia will be frozen along the line of contact, which will mean de facto recognition along the line of contact. Russia will relinquish other agreed territories it controls outside the 5 regions. Ukrainian forces will withdraw from the part of the Donetsk Oblast where they that they currently control, and this withdrawal zone will be Considered a neutral demilitarized buffer zone, internationally recognized as territory belonging to the Russian Federation. Russian forces will not enter this demilitarized zone, which I don't understand how or why they would go for that either, because if it's their territory, then why can't they go there? After agreeing on future territorial agreements, both the Russian Federation and Ukraine undertake not to change these arrangements by force. Any security guarantees will not apply in the event of breach of this commitment. Russia will not prevent Ukraine from using the Dnieper River for commercial activities. Agreements will be reached on the free transport of grain across the Black Sea. 24. All humanitarian committee will be established to resolve outstanding issues. Point one, all remaining prisoners and bodies will be exchanged on an all for all basis. All civilian detainees and hostages will be returned, including children. A family reunification program will be implemented. Measures will be taken to alleviate suffering of victims of the conflict. And then 25, Ukraine will hold elections in 100 days. 26, all parties involved in this conflict will receive full amnesty for their actions during the war and agree not to make any claims or consider any complaints in the future. 27. This agreement will be legally binding. Its implementation will be monitored and guaranteed by the Peace Council headed by Donald J. Trump. Sanctions will be imposed for violations. Note this same general structure was proposed to govern Gaza, or was proposed to govern the Gaza peace agreement. 28. Once all parties agree to this memorandum, the ceasefire will take effect immediately after both sides retreat to agreed points to begin implementation of the agreement. So I know that is a whole lot there. I'm exiting out of some tabs here so I can kind of clean this all up. I don't see them going for this. There's so much in here that, like I said, is like a gray area and favors the US and Ukraine and kind of is detrimental to Russia. I just don't see them really going for it. No, they're not going to allow me to see this. Um, so I could be another round where they have a whole bunch of talks and diplomatically it looks good. It's a win for the Trump administration because they look like they're doing something, but ultimately it just doesn't mean anything at all. So um, I think that's all on Russia, Ukraine, Venezuela, Somalia. That's a whole bunch. I have a couple articles I wanted to read about China, Japan, and Taiwan, and what's going on over there as I seek to kind of put a little bit more information about the ongoing Cold War between Russia, or not Russia, the US and China. So let's open up this one from the Libertarian Institute from our dear friend Kyle Anzalone over there at the Libertarian Institute. First arms sale to Taiwan approved under Trump, dated November 16th. The White House approved a $330 million sale of parts for military aircraft to Taiwan. This is the first time President Donald Trump has signed off on a weapons sale to Taipei since returning to the Oval Office. The State Department has made a determination approving a possible foreign military sale to Taiwan of non-standard spare and repair parts related to the equipment for an estimated cost of $330 million. The statement from the Defense Security Cooperation Agency explained. The aircraft parts are for the F-16, C-130 Indigenous Defense Fighter aircraft. The DSCA said the equipment will be transferred from the U.S. government stock. U.S. armed transfers to Taiwan are a major concern for China. Over the past decade, the U.S. has engaged in massive military buildup in the waters surrounding China, increased military aid to Taiwan, and President Joe Biden pledged to defend the breakaway Chinese region if Beijing attacked. The policies emboldened Taipei with Taiwanese leaders becoming increasingly vocal about independence. Trump downplayed the Taiwan issue after a recent meeting with Chinese President Xi. The president first claimed he did not discuss Taiwan with the Chinese leader, then said Xi would not attack the island while he was in office. The Taiwan question is the core of China's core interests and the first red line that must not be crossed in China-U.S. relations, China's foreign ministry said in response to the sale. So, to throw a little bit of shit China's way here, they kind of talk a big game about this, but ultimately they don't really do anything. They always say, oh, we don't like this. We don't like the arms sales to Taiwan. We definitely didn't like the whole Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan, but they ultimately just kind of let it go. Like, it's cool. We'll let you guys do that, but just know we don't like it. But also, I kind of don't blame them for not really doing anything because what are you gonna do? You're gonna bomb California or New York or something like that? Like, there needs to be more serious talks. And I don't know what the best policy is, but I do know that the US trying to make Taiwan, as they would call it, an unsinkable aircraft carrier is just a horrible idea. China criticizes Japan's plan to deploy missiles on island near Taiwan. So this from Reuters. Sorry. Summary: Japan says plan to deploy missiles to Taiwan is steadily moving forward. Uh, China calls the plan to attempt to calls the plan an attempt to provoke military confrontation. Taipei says Japan has the right to protect Japanese territory, and China's military puts out fiery videos. From November 24th, Reuters, China called Japan's plan to deploy missiles on an island near Taiwan a deliberate attempt to create a regional tension and provoke military confrontation on Monday as diplomatic dispute simmers between the two nations. The remarks come amid their worst diplomatic crisis in years after Japan Prime Minister Sanae Takichi said this month a hypothetical Chinese attack on democratically governed Taiwan could trigger a military response from Tokyo. Right-wing forces in Japan are leading Japan and the region towards disaster. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning told a regular press briefing. Beijing is determined and capable of safeguarding its national territorial sovereignty, which she's referring to Taiwan. Vitriolic state media commentaries. Japan's defense minister Shinjiro Koizumi said on Sunday that plans were steadily moving forward to deploy medium-range surface-to-air missiles unit at a military base in Yonaguni, an island about 110 kilometers, 68 miles off Taiwan's east coast, which is the coast that's essentially facing towards China. The move is extremely dangerous and should raise serious concerns among nearby countries in the international community, especially in the context of Takichi's earlier remarks, Mao said on Monday. China responded to her comments with vitriol and state media commentaries, bans on Japanese seafood, a halt in Japanese movie releases, and a warning to citizens not to visit Japan. Beijing views Taiwan as its own territory and has not ruled out the use of force to take control of it, though the island's government rejects Beijing's claim and says only Taiwan's people can decide their future, which all of the global community, pretty much the entire world, recognizes Taiwan as part of China. So I don't like, how is this a debate? In Taipei on Monday, Taiwan Deputy Foreign Minister Francis Wu told lawmakers that Japan, as a sovereign nation, had the right to take steps needed to protect the security of its territory, pointing out how close Yonaguni was to Taiwan. Japan's strengthening of its relevant military facilities is basically helpful to maintaining security in the Taiwan Strait. So, of course, this is helpful to our national interests as Japan has no territorial designs or hostility towards Taiwan. On Sunday, Koizumi said the missile deployment aimed to protect Yonaguni, adding, "We believe that this unit in place actually lowers the chances of an armed attack against our country." Quote, if war breaks out today, in mid-November, Chinese Defense Ministry warned Japan of a crushing military defeat if it used force to intervene over democratically governed Taiwan. A number of command centers of the Chinese People's Liberation Army followed suit, putting out a series of fiery music videos on social media this past week. The PLA rocket force, which oversees China's conventional and nuclear arsenal, on Sunday showed the footage of the country's intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads and soldiers readying their rifles in a music video titled, "If War Breaks Out Today, This is My Response." In a video posted by the PLA's Navy's South Sea Fleet on Wednesday, a group of soldiers holding rifles and wearing camouflage face paint pointed out, "If fighting breaks out tonight, comrades, are you ready? Artillery has been calibrated, ammunition is in place, and we have locked on the coordinates," one of the soldiers said. The PLA's North Sea Fleet, in another music video posted last Monday, showed warships and aircraft firing missiles hitting targets and fiery blasts. "Come, enemy, let's have a showdown. I've already chambered my bullets, no matter how cunning you are or how ferocious, I will bury you all the same." Which actually, that kind of goes hard. Those lines right there actually go pretty fucking hard. So yeah, basically to Japan, man. Fuck around and find out. But unfortunately, if they do fuck around and find out, then the US is going to go to back them, and then we'll be in a war with China. And I don't think anybody wants that. It's not fucking good, man. It's just not good. So the other thing that we're going to talk about now is the whole chip situation, because the big deal with Taiwan is that they make a bunch of chips, and my chips. We have to defend Taiwan because my chips. If we don't have chips, then China's just going to take over the world, and then what? I don't know. Japan's high-stake gambles to turn Island of Flowers into a global chip hub. The island of Hokkaido has long been an agricultural powerhouse, and now Japan is investing billions to turn it into a global hub for advanced semiconductors. More than half of Japan's dairy produce comes from Hokkaido, the northernmost of its main islands. In winter, it's a wonderland of ski resorts, ice sculpture festivals, and in summer, fields bloom with the bands of lavender, poppies, and sunflowers. These days, cranes are popping up across the island, building factories, research centers, and universities focused on technology. It's part of Japan's boldest industrial push in a generation, an attempt to reboot the country's chip making capabilities and reshape its economic future. Locals say that beyond the cattle and tourism, Hokkaido has lacked other industries. There's even a saying that those who go there only do so to leave. But if the government succeeds in turning Hokkaido into Japan's answer to Silicon Valley, or Hokkaido Valley, as some have begun to call it, the country could become a new contender in the 600 billion race to supply the world's computer chips. An unlikely player. At the heart of the plan is Rapidus, a little known company backed by the government and some of Japan's biggest corporations, including Toyota, SoftBank, and Sony. Born out of a partnership with IBM, it has raised billions of dollars to build Japan's first cutting-edge foundry in decades. The government has raised 12 billion in the company so that it can build a massive semiconductor factory or fab in the small city of Chitose. In selecting the Hokkaido location, Rapidus CDO Atsuyoshi Koike points to Chitose's water, electricity infrastructure, and its natural beauty. Mr. Koike oversaw fab design, which will be completely covered in grass to harmonize Hokkaido's landscape, he told the BBC. Local authorities have also flagged the region at being at lower risk of earthquakes compared to other potential sites in Japan. A key milestone for Rapidus came with the delivery of an extreme ultraviolet lithography system from the Dutch company ASML. The high-tech machinery helped bring about Rapidus' biggest accomplishment yet earlier this year, the successful production of a prototype of 2 nanometer transistors. These ultra-thin chips are at the cutting edge of semiconductor technology and allow devices to run faster and more efficiently. It's a feat only rival chip makers TSMC and Samsung have accomplished. Intel's not pursuing 2 nanometers. It is leapfrogging from 7 nanometers straight to 1.8 nanometers. We succeeded in manufacturing the 2 nanometer prototype in the first time in Japan at an unprecedented speed in Japan and globally. He credits IBM partnership for helping to achieve the breakthrough. Tie-ups with global companies are essential to acquiring the technology needed for this level of chips. So let's talk about this a little bit more and the reason why they're doing this. The main reason why they're doing this is because they want to basically secure more guarantees, money, and contracts from the US. Japan is a major, I think it's non-NATO ally. So basically, um, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines are kind of unsinkable aircraft carriers in a future war with China. And also South Korea. These are all not necessarily client states, although Japan's probably arguably a little bit more of a client state than anywhere else that I named. They're trying to become somewhere that's going to get a whole ton of aid and US industry through developing more chips because the US sees the Taiwan issue as a big issue because if if China decides to blockade Taiwan, then the world doesn't get their chips theoretically, which once again, this is assuming the Hawks territory. My personal perspective on this is that it's not in China's interest to blockade Taiwan and hoard the chips for themselves because they import 9 billion or it might be like $12 billion worth of food from the US. Now, granted, that number's actually gotten lower and lower due to the whole trade war, but there's lots going on that it just wouldn't be in China's interest to blockade Taiwan because the rest of the world would basically look at that and be like, oh, you're interfering with their sovereignty. And it would be like the next Ukraine, which I do have an article that we're going to read if Taiwan is going to turn into the East's Ukraine. Rapidus is confident that it is on track to produce the 2 nanometer chips by 2027. Is it nanometer? I'm sorry. A nanometer, yeah. Produce 2 nanometer chips by 2027. The challenge will be achieving the yield and quality that is needed to survive in an incredibly competitive market, the very areas where Taiwan and South Korea have pulled ahead. TSMC, for example, has achieved incredible success in mass production, but making high-end chips is costly and technically demanding. In 2024, a report said the ASEAN +3 Macroeconomic Research Office highlighted that although Rapidus is receiving government subsidies and consortium members are contributing funds, the financing falls short of the expected 5 trillion yen or $31.8 billion that needed to start mass production. The Center for Security and International Studies previously said Rapidus has no experience in manufacturing advanced chips, and to date, there's no indication that it will be able to access the actual know how for such an endeavor from companies with requisite experience. Finding customers may also be a challenge. Samsung and TSMC have established relationships with global companies that have been buying their chips for years. So once again, this is just about Japan trying to stick their head in here, and we'll see how successful they are. I kind of hope they're successful because this might actually bring the price of like technology down, but who knows how much. I think overall having competition in the semiconductor market is a good thing, though. The lost decades. Nevertheless, Japan's government is pouring money into the chip industry. 27 billion between 2020 and early 2024, a larger commitment relative to its gross domestic product than the U.S. made through the Biden era CHIPS Act, which um, I think trying to incentivize a local chip factory is a good idea, and making these chips domestically is good because I think it would provide a lot of jobs, and also it is better to have your own domestic economy so that way you can export these chips and it brings a little bit more money in the US economy. But that being said, we're still a ways away from there. I'd be perfectly fine with like basically giving taxing these companies at 0%. Like, hey, if you're going to build all these chips here in the US, then we're not going to tax you. And we're going to even maybe give you like favorable packages or something like that. Like, do something to help subsidize these companies and make this like a better opportunity for Americans. I really wouldn't be against the government kind of enabling something like that. Now, would it create a monopoly? Sure, but we can cross that bridge when we get there. Sorry, let me exit out of a few tabs. Um, where was I? In late 2024, Tokyo unveiled a $65 billion package for artificial intelligence semiconductors that could further Rapidus's expansion plans. Sorry, let me get that small again. This comes after decades of decline. 40 years ago, Japan made more than half of the world's semiconductors. Today, it produces just over 10%. Many point to US Japan trade tensions in the 1980s as a turning point. Nayuko Yoshino, professor emeritus at Keio University, said Japan lost out in the technology stakes of Taiwan and South Korea in the 1980s, leaving domestic companies weaker. Unlike its rivals, Japan failed to sustain subsidies to keep its chip makers competitive. Mr. Koike said the mentality has changed. The national government and local government are united in supporting our industry to revive once again. Japan's broader economic challenges also loom large. Its population is shrinking while the number of elderly citizens continues to surge. That has determined that the national budget for years and has contributed to slowing growth. More than a third of its budget now goes to social welfare for the elderly, and that squeezes money available for research, education, and technology. Professor Yoshino says. Japan also faces a severe shortage of semiconductor engineers, an estimated 40,000 people in the coming years. Rapidus is partnering with Hokkaido University and others to train new workers, but agrees it will have to rely heavily on foreigners at a time when public support for workers coming into the country for employment is low, which that kind of checks out because everything I understand about most Asian countries is that they really do not like immigrants. Like they're very, very racist people. And I don't have a problem with that, but if they're looking to expand this and they're going to need people to train and people to kind of do these chips, specifically immigrants, then well, that's going to really piss off the local population. Growing an ecosystem. The government's push is already attracting major global players. TSMC is proving 12 to 28 nanometer chips in Kumamoto, this in the southern western island of Kyushu, a significant step for Japan, even if it lags behind the company's cutting edge production in Taiwan. The expansion has transformed the local economy, attracting suppliers, raising wages, and leading to infrastructure and service developments. Uh, Japan's broader chip revival strategy. Where the hell did that go? Um, Japan's broader chip revival strategy appears to be following a playbook. Establish a fab, and an entire ecosystem will tend to follow. Um, TSMC started building a second plant on Kyushu in October this year, which is due to begin production by the end of 2027. Beyond Rapidus and TSMC, local players like Kioxia and Toshiba are also getting government backing. Kioxia has extended fabs in Yokkaichi and Kitakami with state funds, and Toshiba has built one in Ishikawa. Meanwhile, ROHM has been officially designated as a company that provides critical products under Tokyo's economic security framework. American memory chip maker Micron also receives 3.63 billion in subsidies from the Japanese government to grow facilities in Hiroshima, while Samsung is building a research and development facility in Yokohama. Hokkaido is seeing similar momentum. Chip making equipment companies ASML and Tokyo Electron have both opened offices in Chitose off the back of Rapidus and building a production facility there. This will make a form of global ecosystem, Mr. Koike says, where we work together to be able to produce semiconductors that contribute to the world. Mr. Koike said Rapidus's key selling point would be, as its name suggests, an ability to produce custom chips faster than competitors rather than competing directly with other players. TSMC leads the world, and with Intel and Samsung close behind, our edge is speed. We can produce and deliver chips 3 to 4 times faster than anybody else, and that speed is what gives us an edge in the global semiconductor race. The big bet. Global demand for chips is surging with the rise of AI, while Japan's automakers, still recovering from pandemic era supply shocks, are pressing for more reliable domestically or regionally sourced production across the entire supply chain, from raw materials to finished chips. Securing control over chip manufacturing being seen as national security priority both in Japan and elsewhere, as recent trade frictions, and geopolitical tensions between China and Taiwan raise concerns over the risk of relying on foreign suppliers. We like to provide products from Japan, once again, products that are powerful with great new value, Mr. Koike said. For Japan's government, investing in Rapidus is a high stakes gamble to revive its semiconductor industry and more broadly its tech power. Some analysts say it might be the country's best chance to build a domestic ecosystem to supply advanced chips to its many manufacturers and one day become a formidable challenger in the global market. All right, so that was the second to last article, and we are going to finish up with this article from the Beijing Review. Will Japan be East Asia's version of Ukraine? I guess I lied a little bit earlier when I said it was going to be when I said it was Taiwan will be East Asia's Ukraine. It's not Taiwan, it's going to be Japan, because they're really kind of lining up. I think they want to get on this whole honeypot deal where the US is just going to shower them with money. And then in the event of a war with China, which I think is very unlikely, between Japan and China and also the US and China, I think they're trying to just get in and be like the centerpiece of this whole deal and receive the hundreds of billions of dollars. And this is the problem when you just rain free money on a country, and you have these alliances that eventually they want more and more and more. And then if you have allies that see, like, Ukraine wanted to be like Israel. Israel has received $300 billion of taxpayer money since its founding back in 1948. Ukraine has received, I think, about $250 billion. Japan is probably looking at that thinking, like, well, why can't we get on that gravy train? They're probably not going to, but they want to get in on that gravy train because they figure, okay, well, fuck it. If they're getting all this money, why can't we? Anyways, this is from Brian Berletic, who I am quite a fan of. And Brian, if someone can send this over to him, you have a open invitation to come on the show anytime. Will Japan be East Asia's version of Ukraine? Japan joins the US-driven strategy for China containment. The recent diplomatic crisis sparked by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takichi's comments over Taiwan is not an isolated or spontaneous incident. It is a calculated step in a broader ongoing strategy by the US and its client states towards confrontation with China, a strategy mirroring that which the US likewise created to confront Russia through Ukraine, increasingly the rest of Europe. Takichi told Japan's parliament early in November that a possible attack from China's mainland on Taiwan, which lies just 100 kilometers or about 70 miles from Japanese. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that's around like 60, 70 miles. I might be wrong, but would count as a situation threatening Japan's survival, and it could trigger a military response from Tokyo. The U.S. news broadcaster CNN reported. Takichi's remark come at a time when Japan has begun increasing military spending, widening cooperation with the U.S. militarily, and has even considered shifting its prohibition regarding nuclear weapons within its own territory. So, like I was just saying, I think they're basically trying to get on this whole proxy state gravy train and also get more and more aid from the U.S. Because what Trump campaigned on was actually all these countries raising their defense spending because I think what he wanted was basically to pass the buck off to Europe and the EU and Ukraine to fight off Russia. And I know they're saying about a peace plan, but I think he wants to walk away from that. I don't think they're going to be able to, at least not very easily. But they want to hand that off to the EU and Russia, or the EU and Ukraine to handle Russia, and then hand off the situation in Gaza along with Iran and Hezbollah and all of them over there to the Saudis, UAE, and also Israel. And then the US can focus on China using Australia, Japan, the Philippines, and at one point India, but I think India is kind of out of that now. The true significance of Takichi's statements lies in their synchronization with a radical, rapid shift in Japan's defense security policy, a policy that has been imposed upon it by the U.S. in the same manner has been imposed upon both Ukraine and the rest of Europe vis-a-vis Russia, as laid out by the U.S. Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, in February 2025 directive delivered to Europe and Brussels. For Japan in particular, this means transitioning away from its post-World War II pacifism into a formidable, offensively capable regional military power, serving as a component of the U.S.'s containment architecture. It's a shift a previously neutral Ukraine has already made with catastrophic consequences for both itself and the rest of Europe, and one that pretends similar consequences for Japan. In October 2025, Reuters reported that Japan's new prime minister pledged an early boost to defense spending with a provocative fiscal policy. This was quantified when DW reported in March the same month that Takichi was targeting 2% military spending of GDP by March 2026, aligning with NATO's baseline spending requirements and signaling Japan's further integration into the global US-led military bloc. Now, I know Trump was trying to get a lot of NATO to go up to 5%. I don't know if Japan will keep going, but reading on, it is very likely that this 2% increase is merely an incremental step towards a much greater spending in the near future, likely to follow Europe's now 5% commitment to defense spending as demanded by Hegseth in February 2025. Japan is also shifting its view on nuclear weapons. Reuters commented that Japanese Prime Minister might seek to revise a ban on the entry of such weapons into its territories. This again reflects similar rhetoric from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during the 2022 Munich Security Conference, in which he threatened to void the Budapest Memorandum, which includes prohibitions on Ukraine's acquiring of nuclear weapons. So, actually, I believe Japan's nuclear program. I want to say that they have like a latent nuclear deterrent, but I don't know what the exact deal is. AI overview, no nuclear weapons, adheres strict to non-nuclear proliferation treaty. Despite not having weapons, Japan has the technology and raw materials to produce them if it chose to, leading some to describe it as a screwdriver's turn away from nuclear weapons. So they have a civilian nuclear program. That's what I thought they have. The Fukushima policy, following the 2011 Fukushima accident, Japan reviewed its nuclear policy. The government has since adopted a plan to maximize the use of nuclear energy to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Restarted reactors as of late 2025. 14 reactors have restarted after the Fukushima accident, and 11 more are awaiting approval. Okay, so basically, they do have like a civilian nuclear program, kind of the same thing that like Iran had. Just Ukraine presented Russia with an escalated, even existential threat to its national security then, an increasingly aggressive Japan removing constraints placed on it following its 14-year-long invasion of China during 1931 to 45 presents an escalating, even existential threat to China's national security today. With the U.S. imposing similar policy on the Philippines, the Republic of Korea, and even on the Chinese island province of Taiwan, a united front against China is taking shape, analogous to what the U.S. has shaped NATO into and is using it today against Russia. Extending Russia, extending China. Japan's increasingly aggressive posture fits into a much wider U.S. strategy for the region, just as Ukraine's abandonment of neutrality served a much wider U.S. strategy in Europe. A 2019 RAND Corporation paper titled Extending Russia prescribed using proxies to impose a conflict along Russia's periphery in multiple locations, along with placing economic and political pressure on Russia itself, all aimed at isolating and degrading Russia, precipitating a Soviet-style Union collapse. In a similar manner, the US is preparing a regional front of proxies in Asia Pacific to play a variety of roles confronting and containing China across a number of locations, enhancing the US's own military presence in the region to provide a front line that the US can support and operate safely behind any potential conflict. In 2018, a naval war college paper, A Maritime Oil Blockade Against China, a plan is laid out to interdict China's energy imports at vital checkpoints between the reach of most of China's military capabilities. The plan requires not just US military forces to impose what the paper calls a distant blockade, but cooperation from a number of nations to help enforce the blockade and create deterrence against China's desire to break it. A map accompanying the paper makes it clear the vital role Japan, along with the Philippines and China's Taiwan, plays in the wider regional strategy. The current U.S. Military buildup, including the reshaping of the U.S. Marine Corps into a strictly anti shipping force to be deployed precisely along the choke points described in the 2018 paper, along with the militarization of proxies like Japan, separatist regional authorities of Taiwan and the Philippines, demonstrated the 2018 paper as more than merely a proposal. Just like the 2019 RAND Corporation paper is a framework, and the U.S. has since sent out to implement with a remilitarized aggressive Japan a key component of doing so. So once again, this is just another way of the US trying to kind of square into what they call the Indo-Pacific or the South China Sea and basically create these satellites and outposts where the US is going to stage a war with China. And Japan is really trying to, like I said, get in on this whole gravy train of the US writing a blank check for everybody. Japan's focus on Taiwan, not a coincidence. The aggressive posturing by Japan, particularly regarding Taiwan, takes place in parallel with an increasingly blatant U.S. disregard for its own longstanding one China policy, which the one China policy basically just affirms that Taiwan is part of China and China is, the sovereign over Taiwan. The U.S. State Department's own Office of the Historian hosts the 1972 China-U.S. Joint Communique describing this policy. According to the communique, the United States acknowledges that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain theirs but one China and that Taiwan is part of China. The United States government does not challenge that position, which Joe Biden did, and Trump, I think, sending weapons there challenges that as well. However, the U.S. has since continuously and deliberately violated this policy through engaging in political contacts with the separatist Taiwan without the central government's approval, encouraging allies, including Japan, to take increasingly provocative positions on Taiwan's status to burden share Washington's own growing confrontation with China. And through continued arms sales to the regional administration on Taiwan itself. The Donald Trump administration itself has recently approved a $330 million arm package, which Reuters reports includes components for the U.S. made aircraft F 16s and C 130s already operating on Taiwan. This arms sale is the first under the current Trump administration, but follows similar sales under both the previous Joe Biden administration and the President Trump's first term in office, which he oversaw billions in arms sales to the island province. By encouraging its primary East Asian pawn to escalate tensions over Taiwan, together with expanding military expenditure and hence shifting its position on nuclear weapons, the U.S. is actively pushing a key geopolitical flashpoint toward conflict. This U.S. policy is designed to force China into a corner, making any response appear aggressive, only further justifying a U.S.-led proxy wage buildup and possible conflict designed to contain or even reverse China's rise. Together, these represent symptoms of a single, deeply rooted global US led strategy to confront and contain multipolarism, of which China is the central pillar. In the process, Japan is poised to become at least one of several Asia Pacific Ukraines. Beijing, Moscow, and the growing coalition of nations seeking a multipolar world must recognize that US actions, not rhetoric, are the true indicators of a clear, unwavering commitment to the strategy of coercion, confrontation, and containment designed to maintain America's hegemony at all costs. There must be an equal commitment by an aspiring multipolar world to defend against and ultimately overcome this US strategy. So that is the article, and that is all we have for today. I know that was very news heavy, been going for quite a while. Please let me know. Well, on top of letting me know if you enjoy this stuff and if you like my coverage, please give a like, a thumbs up, leave a comment, retweet, share, do whatever you can to get the word out there, because I feel like I'm one of the only people in the right wing ish space that really covers the China stuff. And I would like to see more conversations surrounding US China relations, because Yeah, Russia and Ukraine are very, very important, and obviously, I talked about that quite a bit today. Uh, China is kind of like the big bad wolf in the situation where this is really the one that the U.S. wants to stick it to. So, hopefully, everybody enjoyed today's show. Hopefully, you learned a lot. Hopefully, you came away a little bit better than you came in. I'm starting to get a little hoarse in the voice here, so I want to play guitar and I want to go spend time with my little girl, and of course, my wife as well. So, thank you everybody so much for listening. This was In Liberty and Health. I will see everybody next Sunday. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share all that good stuff. Go to the Great Megalodon, sign up on the Substack, go to acommoncrown.com. We will have new music out very, very soon. I cannot wait to share that with everybody. So I think with all that, guys, we're going to call our night there. Everybody, thank you so much. And until next time, take care.